even though Sarah Fitzpatrick is already being sued by Kash Patel, and even though she may be being criminally investigated by Kash Patel's FBI, tonight, The Atlantic's Sarah Fitzpatrick published yet another incredible story about, ding, 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 you guessed it, Kash Patel. Now, in this one, 8 people familiar with the matter, including yet again current and former FBI officials, told Fitzpatrick that it is not unusual for Patel to travel with a supply of personalized branded bourbon. Who among us? Now, the 750 milliliter bottle that he travels with is engraved with Kash Patel's name. So Donald Trump is ordering his subordinates to give him your money. And let me just show you what I mean. Scott Bessent has 2 jobs. He's simultaneously serving as both Trump's Treasury Secretary and as the acting commissioner of the IRS. Both jobs. That's how they do it in the Trump administration.
Tonight, The Atlantic has published another significant report on Kash Patel, the current FBI director. According to the publication, 8 sources familiar with the matter, including current and former FBI officials, have confirmed that Patel frequently travels with personalized bourbon bottles engraved with his name. These 750 milliliter bottles reportedly accompany him on official travel. This reporting comes from journalist Sarah Fitzpatrick, who is already facing a lawsuit from Patel and may be under criminal investigation by the FBI he now directs. The circumstances have intensified debate about press freedom and institutional accountability. Meanwhile, a separate controversy has emerged involving Scott Bessent, who currently holds 2 significant positions simultaneously: Treasury Secretary and Acting Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service. This dual role created a consequential situation when President Trump filed a lawsuit against the IRS and the Treasury Department seeking $10 billion in damages. Legal analysts immediately identified a structural conflict, as Bessent, a direct subordinate to the president, would be responsible for dispersing funds to his own boss if the lawsuit succeeded.
That means that when Trump sued the IRS and the Treasury last week for $10 billion, Trump was effectively asking Scott Bessent, his direct subordinate, to just give him that $10 billion. And today, Democratic Senator Ruben Gallego held Bessent's feet to the fire, asking him where exactly he would take that $10 billion from to give to Trump.
Where would that $10 billion come from?
It would come from...
process-wise. I'm not asking, like, your opinion whether it's right or wrong.
It would come from Treasury.
It comes from Treasury, which comes from the general fund?
The Treasury general account.
So taxpayers?
Yes.
During recent Senate testimony, Democratic Senator Ruben Gallego pressed Bessent on the mechanics of such a payment. When questioned about the source of the $10 billion, Bessent acknowledged it would come from the Treasury's general fund, which is financed by taxpayer revenue. The exchange underscored concerns about whether this structure creates conditions for potential self-dealing. These developments occur against a backdrop of broader questions about institutional norms. The concentration of power in fewer hands, the use of government agencies to pursue personal objectives, and the blurring of lines between public service and private benefit have become recurring themes in congressional oversight. The Mar-a-Lago classified documents case represents one of the most extensively documented legal proceedings involving a former president. Jack Smith, who served as special counsel during the investigation, compiled substantial evidence regarding the handling of sensitive national security materials after President Trump left office in 2021. According to Smith's filings and congressional testimony, investigators determined that highly sensitive documents were removed from the White House and transported to Mar-a-Lago. The materials were subsequently stored in various locations throughout the property, including a bathroom and a ballroom storage closet. These were facilities not designed or authorized for the retention of classified national defense information. The indictment Smith brought contained 31 counts under the Espionage Act for intentional retention of national defense information. Additional charges included obstruction of justice and false statements. Each Espionage Act count carried a potential sentence of up to 10 years in prison. In his public testimony before Congress, Smith stated that his team believed the admissible evidence was sufficient to obtain and sustain a conviction at trial. The physical evidence documented in the case files has been described by legal observers as particularly striking. The storage of documents bearing classification markings in unsecured residential spaces contradicted standard protocols for handling sensitive materials. Security protocols established by the National Archives, the intelligence community, and the Department of Defense mandate specific controlled environments for such documents. Investigators concluded these requirements were not met at Mar-a-Lago. Smith's team also documented evidence regarding the response to investigative inquiries. According to the indictment, when investigators sought to recover the materials, there were alleged efforts to conceal or relocate boxes containing documents. These allegations formed the basis for obstruction charges, which prosecutors argued demonstrated consciousness of wrongdoing rather than inadvertent mishandling. The special counsel's report, published in January 2025 after judicial review, opened with a letter stating that the evidence gathered met the standard for prosecution. United States District Judge Aileen Cannon had previously rejected a motion from Trump's legal team seeking to prevent the report's release. The first volume addressed the classified documents case, while a second volume addressed separate election-related investigations. President Trump has consistently maintained in public statements that he possessed broad authority to declassify documents, and that materials removed from the White House were therefore not improperly retained. This defense has been a cornerstone of his public messaging regarding the documents case, repeated in interviews, social media posts, and campaign appearances. However, a significant discrepancy has emerged between these public assertions and the legal positions advanced by Trump's attorneys in court proceedings. Despite the president's repeated public claims of declassification, his legal team has not formally argued in any court filing that the Mar-a-Lago documents were declassified at the time they were removed from the White House. Legal scholars have noted that this gap between public rhetoric and legal strategy represents a fundamental weakness in the defense posture. The distinction matters substantively under federal law. The Espionage Act, which formed the basis for the 31 counts in Smith's indictment, criminalizes the unauthorized retention of national defense information, regardless of classification status in certain circumstances. However, proper declassification procedures, requiring formal documentation, interagency coordination, and notification to relevant stakeholders, would significantly alter the legal analysis. The absence of any such documentation, combined with the refusal of Trump's own attorneys to assert declassification in formal proceedings, has led legal analysts to conclude that the defense lacks evidentiary support. Smith addressed this dynamic in his congressional testimony, noting that the evidence gathered contradicted claims of proper handling. The special counsel told lawmakers that his team had developed proof beyond a reasonable doubt that crimes were committed in connection with both the classified documents matter and separate election interference investigations. He characterized the evidence as overwhelming and stated that convictions would have been likely but for Trump's election to a second term and the constitutional questions surrounding the prosecution of a sitting president. The testimony drew coverage from multiple international news organizations, including the BBC and Al Jazeera, reflecting the global interest in the proceedings. Smith's appearance on Capitol Hill represented a rare instance of a special counsel discussing active investigative findings in a public forum. During the testimony, President Trump responded in real time through social media posts on his Truth Social platform. He characterized Smith as deranged and accused him of ruining lives under the guise of legitimacy. The president also directed Attorney General Pam Bondi to investigate Smith's conduct and to make him pay a big price. These statements, made while Smith was actively testifying, were interpreted by critics as efforts to intimidate a witness and to undermine the independence of law enforcement institutions. Republican senators allied with the administration echoed the weaponization narrative, accusing Smith of politicizing the Department of Justice and alleging that he had withheld records relevant to impeachment proceedings. These claims were not substantiated with specific evidence rebutting the factual findings in Smith's report, leading observers to characterize the response as focused on attacking the investigator rather than addressing the investigated conduct. The Mar-a-Lago documents case illuminates broader questions about presidential accountability and the resilience of American legal institutions. The documented evidence, including the physical storage conditions, the volume of sensitive materials, the obstruction allegations, and the gap between public claims and legal positions, has been evaluated through multiple institutional mechanisms, including criminal indictment, judicial review, and congressional oversight. The case also highlights the tension between political messaging and legal accountability in an era of intense partisan polarization. When public officials make claims that are not replicated in formal legal proceedings, the discrepancy affects public understanding of the judicial process and can erode confidence in institutional neutrality. Conversely, when prosecutors document extensive evidence of potential wrongdoing that cannot be fully adjudicated due to electoral outcomes or constitutional limitations, questions arise about whether accountability mechanisms are adequate to address conduct by the most powerful office holders. Several key takeaways emerge from the documented record. First, the evidence compiled by the Special Counsel's Office established a factual foundation for serious criminal charges, including multiple felony counts carrying substantial prison terms. The physical documentation of document storage conditions provided concrete support for allegations that national security protocols were disregarded. Second, the public testimony under oath by the lead prosecutor represented an unusual but significant contribution to the public record. Smith's statements about proof beyond a reasonable doubt, made in a congressional hearing and reported by international news organizations, created a permanent record of professional assessment that will inform historical and legal analysis regardless of the case's ultimate procedural outcome. Third, the administration's response, characterized by personal attacks on investigators, demands for retaliatory investigations, and efforts to restrict the release of official reports, has drawn criticism from governance experts who argue that such conduct undermines the independence necessary for effective law enforcement. The judicial rejection of efforts to suppress Smith's report demonstrated that some institutional checks remain functional even in politically charged environments. Fourth, the underlying conduct at issue, removal and retention of sensitive national defense information, implicates security protocols that previous administrations of both parties have generally observed. The deviation from these norms, documented through photographic evidence, witness testimony, and electronic communications, creates precedents that national security professionals warn could affect future handling of classified materials across government. Looking ahead, the Mar-a-Lago case will likely influence several ongoing dynamics. Congressional oversight committees continue to examine whether current institutional safeguards are sufficient to prevent similar situations. Legal scholars are analyzing whether statutory frameworks governing classified information require updating to address the specific circumstances of presidential transitions. And the broader debate about whether former presidents can be held criminally accountable for conduct occurring before a return to office remains unresolved by the Supreme Court, creating uncertainty for future cases. The documentary record established by Smith's investigation, encompassing physical evidence, witness testimony, electronic communications, and formal legal filings, will persist as a resource for historians, legal analysts, and policymakers evaluating this period. Whether that record eventually produces political consequences, institutional reforms, or continued polarization depends on how American legal culture processes the tension between documented evidence and partisan allegiance in the years ahead. What remains clear is that the factual findings compiled through the special counsel process represent a significant contribution to the public understanding of presidential conduct and institutional accountability. The storage of national defense documents in residential bathrooms and ballrooms, the alleged direction to conceal materials from investigators, and the gap between public declassification claims and legal silence in court filings constitute a record that will inform assessments of this administration long after the immediate political controversies have subsided. The American legal system has historically depended on mechanisms that can address documented misconduct regardless of the political prominence of the subject. The extent to which those mechanisms function effectively when tested by the highest levels of political power remains a central question emerging from this case, and one that will likely define the boundaries of presidential accountability for years to come.